Have you ever heard a voice so honest it made you stop breathing for a second? Not because it was perfect, but because it felt like something fragile was trying to stay whole. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where janitor carts squeak across linoleum floors and vending machines hum like forgotten lullabies. And somewhere in the middle of Richmond School of Arts in Austin, Texas, a girl was singing. She wasn't on stage. She wasn't even supposed to be in the building. But her voice echoed down the empty auditorium, soft and trembling like light through dusty windows. She was 10, wearing a faded hoodie, sneakers held together by tape, and a name most people had never heard: Ellie Harper. No spotlight, no audience. Just a bucket, a mop, and a song she didn't even know she needed to sing. And yet, someone was listening. This is not a story about overnight fame. It's not about golden confetti or standing ovations at the end of a reality show. It's about the kind of music that slips past microphones and nestles quietly in the heart. So, if you've ever believed that true talent doesn't always wear a fancy dress or carry a last name with legacy, if you've ever found beauty in the simplest voice in the room, type the word hope in the comments. Because in just a moment, you're going to meet the girl who reminded an entire school what it really means to listen. Let's begin with the girl who wasn't supposed to sing. By day, Richmond School of Arts in Austin was a place of color, clamor, and creativity. Students in flowing scarves rehearsed monologues, others pounded piano keys in practice rooms named after composers most kids had never heard of. It was a world filled with sound and dreams and privilege. But by night, the lights dimmed, the halls emptied, and somewhere between the ballet mirrors and the choral risers, a new rhythm took over: the quiet rhythm of mop strokes, plastic gloves, and the soft echo of a cleaning cart's wheels. That was when Ellie Harper came alive. Ellie was 10. She didn't wear tights or tune violins. She wasn't enrolled in any class. She simply followed her mom, Lila, every evening to work because childcare was expensive and bills didn't wait for dreams. While her mother scrubbed staircases and sanitized bathrooms, Ellie would sit outside classrooms, her little back pressed to cool hallway walls, listening to Bach, to Ella Fitzgerald, to original songs from students who didn't know a girl with duct-taped sneakers was memorizing every lyric they sang. She never interrupted. She never asked to join. But each night she carried home invisible sheet music inside her mind. One time she told her mother, "I don't need a music book, Mama. I just close my eyes and follow the sounds." Lila smiled, tired but proud. That's the thing about children like Ellie. They don't ask the world to notice. They learn to build beauty from the shadows of other people's spotlights. The lesson here: sometimes the ones who hear the most are the ones no one thinks is listening. Sometimes the student isn't the one in the front row, but the one wiping down the floor behind the stage. And on one very ordinary night, the quietest girl in the building was about to be heard. Let's move to that night now. The mop had been set aside. The auditorium was empty. And Ellie stepped onto the stage for the very first time, not to perform, but to clean. But something inside her couldn't stay silent any longer. Let's listen in. That night, after the last light flickered off in the west hallway and the vending machine stopped whirring, Ellie did something she had never dared before. She walked up to the edge of the stage. It wasn't grand. Just a polished wooden platform with 2 dusty microphone stands and a forgotten piano pushed into the corner. But to Ellie, it felt like stepping into a secret world, a place she had only watched from far away. She stood in the center, closed her eyes, and sang the only song she remembered in full: "Smile though your heart is aching." Her voice was small, unsure, but it carried. It moved through the room like a gentle wind in an empty chapel, brushing past velvet curtains and resting on the arms of auditorium seats like a blessing no one had asked for. There was no one to applaud, no one to laugh, only silence that felt like it was listening. But what no one knew was that this wasn't the first time Ellie had sung. She had been practicing for months, not with teachers or instruments, but with memory. She had a little notebook spiral bound and stained with sandwich crumbs where she drew musical notes the way she thought they looked. Sometimes she added lyrics phonetically, writing out lines like la-dee-da because she didn't know the spelling of half the words. When a jazz student played trumpet near the janitor closet, she would stop sweeping to tap the rhythm on her thigh. When a vocal coach demonstrated breathing techniques, Ellie practiced them in the restroom mirror when no one was around. She learned harmony by accident, singing along with the echo of her mother's footsteps down a tiled hallway. She wasn't learning the way other kids did. She was gathering pieces quietly and visibly, like a child building a cathedral out of forgotten bricks. Real example. One night a music professor dropped a sheet of lyrics in the hallway. Ellie picked it up, memorized the song, and returned it the next day without saying a word. The professor never knew the difference, but Ellie never forgot the melody. And the lesson, talent doesn't always bloom in well-lit rooms. Sometimes it grows in silence, nurtured by observations, hunger, and a heart that refuses to stop hearing. And that heart was about to be heard by someone who'd spent her whole life listening. Let's move now to the moment when Ellie's voice meant for no one was heard by someone who would change everything. Because upstairs on the second floor balcony of that empty auditorium, someone had paused. Upstairs on the second floor balcony, just above the stage lights, Ellie never meant to stand under a woman had stopped walking. She hadn't planned to be there that night. Margot Green, director of Richmond's Advanced Youth Choir, had simply forgotten her violin case. A quick detour, a quiet building, and then a voice. Not loud, not polished, but hauntingly sincere. She stood in the shadows, not daring to move, afraid the slightest step would scare away whatever was unfolding below. Margot had heard thousands of voices in her lifetime, some trained at Juilliard, others molded by coaches from London to Los Angeles. But this one, it wasn't shaped. It was real. Down below, Ellie didn't know anyone was watching. She just kept singing. And when the last note faded into the walls, she looked around shyly, picked up her mother's mop again, and disappeared backstage as if it had never happened. Margot stood there for a long while, and then she whispered, "That, they don't teach that." Richmond School of Arts prided itself on structure, syllabus, theory, exams, scholarships. Students were grouped by vocal range before they hit puberty. Some had voice teachers by age 6, posture training by age 7, and an entire glossary of Italian musical terms before they hit double digits. Ellie, she didn't know the difference between mezzo-soprano and alto. She didn't know where middle C was. She'd never sung into a microphone or worn anything but sneakers. And yet, she knew how to make a silent room feel full. She knew how to lift a melody gently, like holding something that might break. She didn't perform. She shared. Here's the truth. There's music that can teach you notes, breath technique, and then there's music that can't be taught, longing memory, silence the ache of wishing. And Ellie Harper, the janitor's daughter. She had that second kind of music. It lived in her without permission. And now it had been heard by the one person who could give it a place to grow. Because that same night, Margot made a decision. She didn't file a report. She didn't call security. She waited until the next morning, and then she requested a meeting, not with a student, but with a janitor. Because this wasn't just about a voice. It was about a story the world needed to hear. And in the next chapter, that story takes its first breath with a conversation neither woman ever expected to have. When Margot Green knocked on the maintenance office door the next morning, she wasn't met with a polished welcome or office decor. Just a metal chair, the faint smell of bleach, and a woman tying up her work boots. "Are you Lila Harper?" Margot asked. Lila stood up slowly, surprised but calm. She had the kind of presence you only earn through years of hard work and quiet resilience. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. "Is something wrong?" Margot smiled gently. "No, but I think your daughter might be the reason I couldn't sleep last night." That afternoon, mother and daughter sat side by side on an overturned mop bucket in the janitor's storage room, hands still damp from their shift hearts, still not quite sure what had just happened. Ellie looked at her mom wide-eyed. "She heard me, Mama." Lila didn't answer right away. She just reached into her pocket and pulled out a napkin from the staff lounge. On it she had scribbled Ellie. "Offer to audition. Margot Green. Call tomorrow." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. And then Lila took Ellie's hand and whispered, "Sweetheart, it doesn't matter if your shoes have holes or if your voice shakes. What matters is that when something inside you wants to be heard, you let it out. Even if no one claps, even if no one believes you belong, you still sing." Ellie nodded, not because she fully understood, but because her mother had never said anything she didn't mean. You see, Lila Harper wasn't just a janitor. She was a mother who gave up college because her own mother got sick. A woman who once wrote songs in the back of math class, but traded guitar strings for grocery lists and lyrics for laundry shifts. She never complained. She never blamed. She just raised a daughter with the kind of quiet dignity you can't teach from a book. And now, watching Ellie wrap her little hands around that napkin like it was a golden ticket, she knew something deep in her bones. This wasn't just Ellie's moment. It was theirs. A torch passed. A hope preserved. Because when Lila whispered strength into Ellie's ear that night in the janitor's room, she wasn't just giving her permission to sing, she was giving her a future she never had. Now the question was, would Ellie dare step into a world that was never built for girls like her? In the next part, we'll follow her first real encounter with a music classroom, not as a cleaner, but as a singer. And let's just say, not everyone was ready for what she brought with her. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the sun hung low, like a copper coin melting into the Austin skyline. Most of the students at Richmond School of Arts had already gone home. The final echoes of piano keys had faded. The scent of floor wax replaced the smell of theater makeup, and the auditorium normally filled with applause and polished performances was now still waiting. That night, Ellie didn't come to sweep. She came to sing. She stood in the wings for a while, unsure. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she stepped out onto the stage. There were no spotlights, no audience. Just row after row of empty velvet seats, silent, unmoving witnesses. In her hands was a crumpled slip of paper, the lyrics to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, written in her own handwriting, some letters backwards, the ink slightly smudged. She took a deep breath and began. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. Her voice was thin at first, soft, almost apologetic, like someone knocking gently on a door they didn't believe would ever open. But as the melody unfolded, something shifted. Her body relaxed, her eyes closed, her voice rose. Not loud, not perfect, but unmistakably true. Each note felt like it came from a place deeper than practice, from a hunger, a memory, a kind of wonder the world had no name for. And for the first time, Ellie wasn't borrowing a moment. She was claiming it. What she didn't know was that in the farthest corner of the darkened auditorium, one light remained on. Margot Green was there again. No clipboard, no pen, just her heart in her throat. And when the last note trembled and fell into silence, Margot didn't clap. She just whispered to herself, "It's not polish, it's purity. You don't always need an audience to prove your worth." Sometimes the most powerful performances happen when no one's looking except for the one person who truly sees you. Ellie didn't bow. She just folded the lyric paper, placed it back into her pocket, and walked off stage. But she left behind something precious. A song that had finally been sung, and a silence that had been transformed. The next day, the audition was no longer a possibility. It was a promise. In the next part, we'll follow Ellie as she receives an invitation into a world she never believed was hers. And the first time she sits in a real music classroom, not as the janitor's kid, but as a student. The following Monday, Ellie and her mother were asked to meet in the main office at 4:00 p.m., long after the students had gone home and just before Lila's night shift began. They sat quietly on the edge of two worn chairs, hands folded, clothes still faintly scented with lemon disinfectant. Ellie swung her legs gently, her shoes not quite reaching the floor. The door opened. In stepped Margot Green, carrying a violin case in one hand and a soft, impossible smile in the other. "I believe you're Ellie," she said, kneeling down so their eyes were level. "And I believe you have something to share with the world." Ellie blinked, unsure if this was real. Lila stood behind her, silent, steady, like a lighthouse watching her daughter drift towards something bigger than either of them could explain. Margot didn't waste time with small talk. She opened her folder and pulled out a single sheet. "This is a special audition. You'll sing for 3 members of the faculty next week. No pressure, no competition. Just a moment for you to be heard. If they agree, you'll be considered for a full scholarship in the children's preparatory program." Lila looked down at Ellie. "You want this?" Ellie looked up, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. "I think I always have." Margot placed her violin case on the floor and said something she rarely told even her most promising students, Ellie. "Technique can be taught, but truth, that has to come with you. And you, my dear, are already carrying it." When there was. That night at home, Ellie couldn't sleep. She lay on the pull-out cot beside her mother, staring at the peeling ceiling and holding her lyric notebook to her chest like it was a treasure map. For the first time, the world didn't feel like something to watch from a hallway. It felt like something she might get to walk into. Sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you. Not because you've ticked every box, but because you dared to sing before you knew if anyone was listening. Margot Green didn't see a poor girl with scuffed shoes. She saw a voice, a spirit, a truth, and she knew. If this girl could find her footing, she might shake something loose in everyone else. Now, the next test would come. Not in the form of a performance, but in a classroom where students spoke a language Ellie had never learned yet. The classroom smelled like new paper and old confidence. Posters of Mozart and Ella Fitzgerald lined the walls. A whiteboard listed vocal ranges, soprano, mezzo, alto, with colorful diagrams. Students buzzed around in clean uniforms, embroidered backpacks slung over one shoulder. Their laughter felt practiced, their posture rehearsed. And then came Ellie. She wore the only collared shirt she owned, the one her mother ironed the night before, until the seams looked brand new. Her jeans were neatly cuffed, her shoes freshly scrubbed, though no amount of polish could hide the years they had already walked through. She stood in the doorway clutching her notebook, the same one she'd scribbled lyrics in, while sitting behind janitor carts. The room quieted not rudely, not loudly, just enough for her to feel the weight of being different. The instructor smiled politely. "This is Ellie Harper. She's joining us on a trial basis." Trial. The word hung in the air like a question that hadn't been answered yet. Ellie nodded, took the empty seat in the back, and opened her notebook. As the lesson began, she heard phrases that didn't belong to her world. Find your diaphragm support. Watch your vowel resonance. Let's modulate through the bridge. She blinked. Someone whispered, "She doesn't even know what vibrato means." Another voice this time, from a girl with a pearl headband. Didn't her mom clean the restrooms? The comment wasn't cruel. It was casual, and somehow that made it worse. But Ellie didn't flinch. She just kept writing, kept listening, kept remembering. When the instructor asked them to sight-sing a melody, Ellie couldn't read the notes. But when she closed her eyes and hummed what she heard, she landed every pitch flawlessly. It was instinct, not training. The instructor paused, looked at her twice, but said nothing. A real-world truth. The greatest pressure isn't always failure. It's not belonging. Ellie wasn't afraid of singing. She was afraid of being found out that she was learning as she went, that she had no vocabulary, no coach, no legacy, just a voice, and a mother who believed in it. That night, Ellie sat in the back seat of the cleaning van, her voice quiet. "Mama, maybe I don't belong there." Lila didn't argue. She just said, "Then prove them wrong not by shouting louder, but by letting them hear what they've forgotten how to feel." And so, Ellie returned, every day, with her notebook, her silence, and her truth. Because she didn't need to fit in. She came to stand out. And soon, she would. The piano room was smaller than Ellie expected, but the Steinway grand inside it looked like it belonged to another world. Polished black lacquer. Ivory keys like rows of untouched snow. Its lid lifted open like a waiting wing. Ellie hovered by the door, not sure if she was supposed to enter. The instructor, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Calloway, motioned gently. "Come in, Miss Ellie. Today's your turn." She stepped forward slowly, her sneakers making the faintest squeak against the hardwood. She looked at the piano like a child staring at a mirror, for the first time half afraid of what might reflect back. "Have you ever played before?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, sir, but I've listened." Mr. Calloway smiled. "Then we'll start there." He guided her to the bench, adjusted the height. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling ever so slightly. He pressed one note, a middle C. "Try it." Ellie mirrored him. The sound rang out simple, pure. "Good." He nodded. "Now, hum with it." She did. And in that moment, the room changed. Note by note, Ellie followed his lead. But she wasn't reading sheet music. She was listening. When he played a chord progression, she responded not with technical accuracy, but with emotional instinct. Like the sound was already inside her, and the piano was just helping it come out. Other students watched through the glass window, some puzzled, some annoyed, a few mesmerized. One whispered, "She's not even reading the notes." Another muttered, "She's faking it." But Mr. Calloway leaned forward and said, quietly almost to himself, "No, she's feeling it." Es besis serp, es bist. By the end of the session, he had barely spoken, just played. And Ellie had sung, no exercises, no corrections, no critiques, only connection. A lesson that matters. Technique sharpens sound, but soul sharpens meaning. Ellie didn't know music theory. She didn't know how to sight read or count rests, but she knew how to match emotion to tone, how to shape silence into something worth hearing. And for the first time, the instrument wasn't a wall. It was a door. When the session ended, Ellie stood up and whispered, "Thank you for letting me try." Mr. Calloway nodded. "You didn't just try, Ellie. You reminded me why I teach." The word began to spread, quietly, but unmistakably, that maybe, just maybe, the janitor's daughter wasn't just good for someone without training. She was good, period, and that truth would soon face its biggest test: the final recital, an audience, a stage, and a choice. The recital hall was glowing. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, painting warm rectangles across the floor. Velvet curtains hung like theater royalty. Seats were filled not just by parents and instructors, but by donors, alumni, and a few local press who'd heard whispers of a voice with no past. The lineup was posted on the wall, names in gold font. Performers listed with accomplishments: 6 years in vocal training, state youth ensemble finalist, winner, Austin Young artist competition. And at the very bottom, Ellie Harper, solo vocal. No mention of her training, no mention of her past, just her name. Backstage, Ellie stood alone. Her white blouse was borrowed, her skirt ironed by her mother at dawn. Around her, students stretched, sipped tea, and adjusted in-ear monitors. One girl in a glittering blue gown looked her up and down and smirked. "She's really gonna sing without accompaniment." Someone else whispered, "Last year she was cleaning gum off these floors." Ellie heard it, all of it, but she didn't let it in. She was holding something stronger than doubt. A promise she'd made to herself the first night she ever hummed in an empty auditorium, that no matter what, she would not walk away from the music that lived inside her. The MC announced our next performer, Ellie Harper. A few polite claps. Ellie stepped onto the stage. The lights were warm, the crowd faceless, but somewhere in the third row, she could feel her mother's presence steady, quiet waiting. She held the microphone gently, then lowered it. "I'd like to sing without it," she said softly. A brief pause, then a nod from the sound engineer, and then, "You are my sunshine." Her voice rose soft at first, like a memory waking up, then steadier, fuller. She didn't belt, she didn't perform. She simply told the truth, through song. Each lyric wrapped in every early morning she watched her mother work. Every hallway she sat alone. Every note she carried in silence. By the time she reached the final line, "Please don't take my sunshine away," the room was still. Even the most seasoned instructors stopped writing. A music critic lowered his pen and wiped his eyes. A girl in the front row who once mocked her was now leaning forward, breath held. And when the last word faded, no one moved. Not because they didn't care, but because they did. It was not applause that broke the silence. It was one person, Ellie Harper, who rose to her feet, hand over heart, tears in her eyes, then another, until the whole auditorium stood, in reverence. When truth is sung, not staged, it moves people, not with volume, not with technique, but with recognition of something lost and something found again. That day, Ellie didn't just sing, she reminded everyone what it means to be human. But the story wasn't over, because after the applause faded, someone walked up to her with an envelope in hand, and that envelope would change everything. After the recital, while other students gathered with their families, taking photos beneath the stage banner, Ellie sat quietly on the edge of the steps, her hands folded over her skirt, her breath still catching up with her heartbeat. Her mother walked over still in her work shoes, holding a small bouquet of daisies she'd picked from the parking lot median. "I didn't have money for roses," she said. Ellie smiled. "I like these better." They sat like that for a moment, just mother and daughter, no titles, no spotlights, until someone cleared their throat. It was Margot Green holding an envelope sealed with the emblem of Richmond Conservatory. "We had a meeting," she said, "an emergency one. Every faculty member voted yes." Lila stood up slowly. Ellie looked up, unsure if she'd heard right. Margot continued, "Ellie Harper, we'd like to offer you full admission into our year-round youth program. Tuition, books, lessons, all covered, starting this fall." The envelope was warm from Margot's hand, but Ellie didn't open it. She just looked at her mother, eyes wide and uncertain. "Can she come with me?" she asked softly. "I don't want to go without her." Margot blinked, then smiled. "If your mother is the reason you sing the way you do, then I think this school would be lucky to have you both." That evening, they didn't go out to celebrate. No cake, no cameras. Just grilled cheese at home and an old cassette tape of lullabies they used to play when the heater broke in winter. But that night, Ellie sang one more song just for her mom, just for them. And it wasn't for a stage. It was for the quiet room where every dream had once seemed out of reach. Years later, when Ellie Harper stood in a televised interview as a now acclaimed singer-songwriter, the host asked her, "What was the moment that changed your life?" She didn't hesitate. "It was the day my mom stood alone in a crowd of strangers and clapped for me first." If you've ever felt like the world wasn't made for people like you, if you've ever stayed silent because you thought no one was listening, let Ellie remind you. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. Because the world doesn't need louder voices. It needs truer ones. If this story moved you even a little, type, "I hear you" in the comments. Not for us, but for the voices around you that are still afraid to sing. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you in the next story. But for now, let the quiet linger, let it echo, and let it mean something.